So, like everyone else, I just finished watching Hamilton the other day, and just one aspect of the show that I really want to talk about. I was really struck by the way they presented King George and then George Washington, the two Georges. You've got King George, who's presented as this very, you know, power hungry. He's almost a jealous lover sort of character. Telling America they'll come crawling back. He's presented as a joke, uh, as someone who loves power but is powerless. He's feminized in the play. And he's presented, you can hear the audience laughing at him if you watch it on Disney. And then immediately after his first song, you get General George Washington is the great American hero who's very manly, very confident, very sure of himself, completely flawless. Everybody looks up to him. This is the great hero of the Revolution. And I was struck by this as a Canadian, as someone who studied literature from that period of American history, from late 1700s, early 1800s. And it got me thinking about one story in particular, and that's Rip Van Winkle by Washington Irving. And that's a story I teach in my prose fiction course. There's a lot in there about myth making, about how history is told, and a lot of it is about Washington Irving's own skepticism about the American experiment and what an independent America was actually meaning when he was writing it in 1819. A lot of that is the invention of an American myth. And part of that is the story of Rip Van Winkle, who's this character who falls asleep sometime before the American Revolution, wakes up sometime after the American Revolution. He's asleep for 20 years. He falls asleep, everything's peaceful and quiet in his little village near the Catskill Mountains in New York. And then when he wakes up, it's also, the village has changed quite a bit. There's a lot more activity, people are really bustling. And one thing he finds is that people are talking about some kind of election, which is something Rip Van Winkle never heard of. People start asking who he's going to vote for. He sees a lot of the buildings in town have changed, the people have changed because he's been gone for 20 years. And one of the most striking moments in the story, the one that really speaks to Hamilton and the contrast between the two Georges, is when Rip Van Winkle enters a bar. And in the bar, previously in the story we told there was a picture of King George in this bar, in this inn. But Rip walks in now, and he sees something. He says he recognized on the sign, however, the ruby face of King George, under which he had smoked so many a peaceful pipe. But even this was singularly changed. The red coat was changed for one of blue and buff. A sword was held in the hand instead of a scepter. The head was decorated with a cocked hat, and underneath was painted in large characters, General Washington. It's really important in that imagery of that picture of King George, where they don't change the face, they don't replace the picture, they just paint over the clothes. The scepter becomes a sword. So in the story, the face of King George and the face of George Washington are identical. It's the same painting, it's the same person. And that, I think, is a really interesting commentary on how the political machinations, the complete revolution in governance, kind of doesn't mean a whole lot to the average person. To the people in this village, the person in charge might as well be the same. His face is the same, his clothes are a little bit different, the symbology has changed, the symbols, the meaning behind those symbols certainly has changed. What it means to be an American, in 1790 versus 1770, is a lot. It's a big difference. But we see, even in Hamilton, something, or perhaps more so in Hamilton, that so much of that play is about these political figures, or the founding fathers, their private arguments, their political arguments. None of that really means a whole lot to the average American citizen. Is the argument that's being made in Rip Van Winkle. Some of the superficial things have changed, but the people still behave the same way. And that becomes clear at the end of the story, where even though the town seems to look different and people are a whole lot busier than they used to be, in the end, Rip Van Winkle very easily settles into his old way of life. We learn that his son, Rip Van Winkle Jr., has been kind of living the same lifestyle he has. His father had been before he fell asleep. He was very lazy, just hung out around town, talking to people, never really doing anything important, because there was nothing really important for him to do. So the point Washington Irving really makes in this story is that for all the the noise and the discussion and the revolutionary thinking that came with the American experiment, the establishment of America as an independent nation, despite all the noise around that, we should be a little bit critical, or at least think about what does that mean? What's that going to mean in day-to-day living? How is that going to improve people's lives? Not how is it going to empower the leadership, but how is it actually going to improve life for the average person? And of course, this is something we're all thinking about, discussing very much in the current American climate. And those discussions are not new. Washington Irving is already, in 1819, when he writes Rip Van Winkle, he's already questioning what the value is of this revolution, what the value is of a leadership that's thinking about their own personal advancement. As we see in Hamilton, they're thinking more about their own careers than they are about what exactly a better society looks like for everybody. And that wasn't even new to Washington Irving. Charles Brockden Brown was writing novels in the 1790s exploring these same issues about what it means to be in America divorced from the traditions and the mythology of the English past. What does it mean to completely be thrown into this new nation with a young history and a young mythology? And the results are often gruesome in Brockden Brown's novels. Despite believing in the United States of America, there's a lot of questioning. Even amongst the Founding Fathers, there's some questioning about whether it makes sense to do this. So Hamilton just reminded me of all of that, especially in the way King George is looked upon as kind of a joke. Rip Van Winkle looks at the joke really is that there's no difference between a George Washington and a King George. They're both these aloof figures, mythologized one way or another, that have very little to do with the average American or British citizen.